gentlemen, we're glad to have you here tonight. My name is Skip Rutherford, the Dean of the Clinton School of Public Service, and we welcome you to another in our series of public programs and distinguished lectures. May I ask, please, that you turn your cell phones, beepers, electronic devices, and any other equipment you might be holding off, if you could. I'm really excited about this program tonight because, as my friend Andy Abrams knows, when I served on the Little Rock School Board, one of the issues that troubled me was the lack of inclusion of African American history and African American role models in our textbooks. And Diane and I spent at lunch today talking about that issue because there's a great debate on Black History Month and whether you should do that in a month or over the year. But either way you come down on the side of that issue, the fact is that the history books were not inclusive. And as we saw with Tim Heshaw's program about the first African Americans at Jamestown, we're now getting people to write about history and to make it more inclusive. This book is going to be on sale at the conclusion of this program. I hope you buy it because it is a remarkable story about some remarkable women, some of whom have been remarkable for a long time. We just didn't know it, and history didn't tell us. So it's worth having in your own personal libraries and in the school library, and we certainly have one in ours. So it is a very important edition, I think, and I applaud her for writing it. To introduce our speaker today is Julie West. Julie is a Clinton School student. She's a native of Alabama. She's called Little Rock home for 22 years. She has a degree in nursing, and she's studied cultural anthropology, all of which lead her to an interest in global and international issues. At the Clinton School, she's working on her group project on an initiative to promote products made in the Arkansas Delta. Fascinating project that you will hear more about, and one that we are strongly committed to help promote those small businesses who are doing great work in the Delta. And we're proud and honored to partner with them in this project. And Julie and her team will be doing some really important work. So please welcome Julie West.
Thank you, Dean Rutherford, and good evening, everyone. Having spent the last 20-plus years working with women scientists of all colors at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences here, I am especially honored to introduce tonight's speaker, fellow Alabamian, Dr. Diane Jorden. Although we were just talking, we're not too sure that today is a good day to admit we're from Alabama after the football weekend, but please forgive us. Dr. Jorden grew up on a farm in Bullock County, Alabama, surrounded by a loving and supportive family. Her mother, Elizabeth Grooms Jorden, was one of the first to notice and nurture the budding scientist within. When she was 9 years old, her mother bought her a pair of binocular magnifying glasses to take with her around the farm as she was looking at the bugs and the things that she found. From this early interest in things organic, Dr. Jorden went on to complete her undergrad degree in biology at Tuskegee University, her master's at Alabama A&M, and her PhD in environmental soil microbiology at Michigan State University. She then enjoyed an active academic and research career while serving on the faculty at the University of Missouri at Columbia. In her career, she's garnered a number of firsts. At the University of Missouri, she was the first woman ever hired in the Soil and Atmospheric Sciences Department and the first African American woman tenured in a research science department. At Michigan State University, she was the first African-American woman to earn a doctorate in soil microbiology. But not resting on these laurels, she went on to give something back. She wanted to give something back to those by working to educate all of us on the issues facing young women and minorities who were studying math and the sciences. As she prepared these talks, she found very little information published to go on, so she then embarked on a 9-year journey to interview African-American women scientists, and that journey culminated in the book that Dean Rutherford mentioned. The title is Sisters in Science: Conversations with Black Women Scientists on Race, Gender, and Their Passion for Science. With its publication, Dr. Jorden lifted the lives of her African-American fellow women scientists from the realm of the invisible into the eyes of the larger American public, and by doing so, helped encourage young people of all colors to be interested in the sciences. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming and wishing happy birthday to Dr. Diane Jorden.
Thank you, Julie. That was a wonderful introduction. Let me know if you can't hear me. Am I sounding okay? Okay. I would like to thank the Clinton School of Public Service for inviting me, and the University of Arkansas. Dean Rutherford, you've been wonderful. I enjoyed our conversation today. I thank Patrick Kennedy for the initial invitation. Nikolai has been a wonderful host, as well as Bob showing us the Presidential Library today. I think that you all are one of the friendliest states that I've ever been in. You are so warm. I just have appreciated the warm welcome that you have given me. I cannot not mention Alpha Chi National Honor Society and Dr. Organ and Ms. Laura Knoll for coming down today to support me. I am an advisor to this premier national undergraduate and soon-to-be graduate honor society. And I just thank you all for taking the time out of your schedule to come and spend this evening with me. I would be remiss if I did not introduce you all to my sister. This is my sister, Shirley Jorden. She is my rock. Most people think we're twins. She is also a professor at Alabama State, a writing English literature professor, and she has supported me through my journey in science all the way. So I want you to know here publicly today that I appreciate your sacrificing your time, your finances, just to come here today to support me. Thank you. So I want to introduce you to 3 Black women scientists tonight. They have wonderful stories. Today is a day of reflection for me because it is my birthday. I am 49 years old today. I know women never tell their age, but I am proud to be 49, and I'm about to enter into a new decade. So I have been reflecting quite a bit because as I think back, 1 year before my birth, as you all know, and as you get ready to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Little Rock 9, is significant for me. I grew up in a small rural town in Alabama. This town is called Midway. Back in the spring, I had the privilege of appearing on the Tony Brown Journal. Most of you know that on PBS. So I told him that I was from Bullock County, Alabama. He says, "Oh, Dr. Jorden, you must be from this little small town, and you must be," well, he sort of implied that I was ashamed. I wasn't ashamed. I just said, well, actually, it's Midway. It's off Highway 82 if you're ever in Alabama. That's where I'm located. So I am reminded of what these 9 brave Americans did to make life a little easier for me and for you. So, being born in the late 1950s in Alabama, I'm old enough to remember. I'm old enough to remember the signs. I'm old enough, just old enough to remember working with my grandparents in the cotton fields. And my mother always reminded me, and she always said, "Well, you didn't really pick no cotton like we pick cotton." I said, "I know, but I am old enough to remember having to go to the back of the bus." So it's quite significant this evening that I'm here and that I remember. As Julie has said, I was fortunate enough to have a wise mother. As a matter of fact, I was fortunate enough to know my great-grandparents. This is really significant, to know Grandma, to know even my grandmother's mother when I was growing up. And I can remember them telling me, "You can do anything that you want to do, as long as you're prepared and as long as you're willing to go the distance. And most of all, as long as you trust in God and not to your own understanding." And that's what I try to do. But the fact that I was fortunate enough to have a wise mother to say, "Let me encourage this kid. Let me find something that might stimulate her. Let me buy these magnifying glasses. Let me give her something to engage her." So I appreciate that. And you will hear many of the stories, similar stories from these women when you read the book. One such scientist was Yvonne Clarke. Yvonne Clarke, her essay is titled, "Still Going Strong." And I titled that essay that way because she is now in her late 70s. She is a professor at Tennessee State University. She is still teaching freshman engineering, those huge classes in engineering. And I particularly appreciate her because she will call me up even now from time to time and say, "Miss Jorden, this is YY Clarke. How are things going?" And she just brings forth a beautiful spirit. This woman received her bachelor's degree from Howard University in 1952. She's not the first black woman to receive an engineering degree. However, she tells me, or she told me that, "Miss Jorden, see, most of the women did not like to build and break down things. But when I was a kid, my dad bought me an erector set, and they would let me fix things around the house. I love doing that. My parents did not mind." So you see the role of parents coming alive and what parents can do at an early age. Now, just to give you a little perspective on how significant it was to interview YY Clarke, most of the engineering degrees, even for a black male, the doctorate was not received until 1925. Okay, so obviously they were doing it a bit earlier, okay? Also, for white women, because I think we have to look at both perspectives, and I'm trying to put it in some context. Even for them, it was in the late 1800s. So it's significant that I was fortunate enough to be able to talk to her. She is still putting history into science by teaching and has not retired from Tennessee State. Now, one of the things that I did with the book was to divide it into 3 or 4 main areas. I wanted to know what were the early influences, and I've already talked about a little bit using Ms. Clarke as an example. I also wanted to know race and gender. What were some of those influences? Although I did not want to box in the scientists, I did want to look at those influences. Their family life, strategies that they would recommend for other young women or underprivileged children, or for that matter, young men. Most of these women had experiences as a student or professional in both historically black colleges as well as in predominantly white institutions. After they graduated, some of these women chose to spend their careers in historically black colleges. At the time that I was doing the interviews, I primarily focused on race and gender barriers. However, as you read some of these stories, you will see that class is an important factor in some of these women's lives. Some of these women were children, of course, of the black middle class, especially those who were in the pre-modern day civil rights. One example that I will share with you is Dolores Shockley. Dolores Shockley grew up in Mississippi. Her parents were educated, and her mother, there again mothers, her mother sent her to a private missionary school. And because she recognized, Dolores said that she wanted to become a pharmacist. She said she noticed there was no black pharmacist where she was located in the Delta. So her mother sent her to this missionary school where she could get a strong background in chemistry. She became the first black woman to receive her PhD in pharmacology. So in some ways, she did better than pharmacy because she went into the research aspects of that. This was from Purdue University in 1955. Now, after graduating from Purdue, she did postdoctoral work in Denmark. And I just want to try to bring her voice alive for you a bit. She describes her experience there like this. She says, "I remember loving being in Denmark. The Danish people seemed to value and respect me. It was just the beginning of a terrible time in America. I remember the local newspapers all wanted to interview me about the Lucy case. Of course, some of you are old enough in the room to remember the Lucy case, the Arthurine Lucy case, where she applied to the University of Alabama. She wanted to go in the graduate school. Of course, maybe most of you may remember in 1963, that shameful part of history where Governor Wallace stood in the door of Vivian Malone when they wanted to enter the undergraduate program. But that's the case that she is talking about. I appreciated the interview with Dr. Shockley because I think she was and is a woman in science who was willing to share her story and really stood up for herself, even as a young professional. After she returned to the States from Denmark in the late 50s, she took a position at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. How many of you are familiar with Meharry Medical College? Okay, very good. She openly talked about gender discrimination that she experienced as a young professional and how actually race early on was viewed as a positive factor. So I just want to share what she had to say. When I asked her, "Do you feel gender played a role in how you were viewed as a scientist?" she says, "Yes, I think early on being a black woman was helpful to me. I think it was very positive in my particular case." You might not expect her to have been saying that in the 1950s, right? For example, I can remember having 2 white female colleagues who wanted a PhD in pharmacology, but they were literally stopped at the master's level. They were totally discouraged from pursuing the doctorate. But I was treated like I was just one of the bunch. Now you're going to hear something a little later after the modern day civil rights. Sisters are singing a different tune. They felt that my white women colleagues were going to get married. We know. And that would be the end of it. I guess in my case, they didn't care. I really don't know for sure. That was early on in my graduate career. Now watch how things shift. However, things really changed as I began my professional career. At least 2 times, I believe that gender became an important issue in my career. When I was offered the job at Meharry, the salary that I was quoted was ridiculous. I didn't hesitate to tell the president that I would not work for that salary. Can you imagine walking into the president's office saying that? In fact, I told him that I would not work for less than the men who would be starting out. My 3 male colleagues were offered the very salary that I had quoted him. Because I was a woman, he felt that I did not deserve the same salary as the men. This type of behavior continued at different points in my career. My former acting chair did a similar thing to me in regards to a raise that I deserved. He recommended all the males, and 1 white female colleague, he recommended that she get the raise. Guess what he said to her when she questioned him? He said that since I was married, I thought marriage was a great thing. I didn't need a raise. He was a white male telling me this. Gender has definitely played a role in my career as a scientist. I guess to some extent, maybe it was raise also, since he did want the white female colleague to get a raise. It's hard to tell sometimes. In my case, being married was in some ways used against me. For a man, marriage was seen as a positive characteristic, but not in my case. At this point, I'm the first black woman to chair a Department of Pharmacology in the United States. I began acting chair in 1988, and I was made permanent chair in 1994. So you see the range of experiences that she's discussing, and I think this is significant. I think it was very significant that she, if you understand the power behind what, well, I guess any president has at a university, but certainly in the late 1950s, certainly at a historically black college. So she stood up for herself quite early on. And I will also say that for me, the reason I took the time to read that to you is so significant as a researcher, because I'm in a delicate position as the researcher and also as a black woman scientist. In some ways, I did feel censored sometimes. I mean that I understood where the women were coming from, but at the same time, I felt that if we don't tell our stories as openly and honestly as we possibly can, then we keep going in circles. How do we, I don't know, for lack of a better word, how do we create an environment now for our young women? How do we, I don't know if we can fix the problem, but how can we make our situation better if we are not willing to stand up and say the truth, which I'm sure maybe some of you may find that anyone who has dealing with more than one issue or more than one influence, such as a black woman scientist, we have to talk about not only just race, not only race in a black and white context, but also what happens within our own race. This leads me to my third sister in science. Meet Dr. Linda Jorden. We haven't figured out if we are related yet. We probably are, right? Everybody in the South is related. She says she has roots in Alabama. If you ever meet her, and I hope you do, you will never forget her. She has a strong voice and a strong will. Her essay interview was titled, "An Unlikely Scientist." Linda was born in 1956 in the Bromley Heath housing project in Roxbury, near Boston. In the Bromley Heath housing project, at least 85% of the tenants were on public assistance. Linda, along with her mother and two sisters, were no exception. Linda, like me, also had a wise mother. When she was a kid, her mother would make her do extra homework. She would make her work on puzzles. She would make her figure out the grocery bill. My mother would do that as well, so I think it worked out in terms of my mathematical skills, which is so needed in a science career. Of course, things went great for Linda for a while. As with family situations, her family life changed a bit. Her mother decided to remarry. She remarried a man with 12 children. Linda talks about this. She got lost. So as she got lost, she already had two sisters, so this is 15 kids. I don't know how her mother did it, frankly. But anyway, she began to become a delinquent teenager. She started hanging out. So she was just on the edge of becoming a delinquent teenager when a program, well, I should say more accurately, when a person came along who ran a program called Upward Bound. How many of you are familiar with Upward Bound? Yes, Joe Warren, Dr. Joe Warren, director, he was director of the Upward Bound program at Brandeis University. So she was hanging out, she went in the cafeteria one day, and Professor Warren was there, and he said, come on in, come on in. And they began to have a discussion about what she was going to do with her life, okay? Now, if I may pause or digress a moment, I want to say to you tonight, I don't want to get political, but I think I should say this, because if you think social programs and extra taxes for the education of citizens is not important, just take a look at me or Linda Jorden, my sister in science. maybe my cousin too. On the one hand, I was in a small rural town with very limited resources. I always tell my mom, if only we could have been in the city part, what we call the city part of Midway, because we were way out in the country, some 10 miles, then maybe I would have excelled in music. She said, you still had a chance, don't lay that on me. But anyway, Linda, on the other hand, was in an urban ghetto. Both of us became scientists because social programs helped us achieve those goals. She went to Upward Bound. I, on the other hand, in the 1960s, I don't think that was an Upward Bound program, but there were college students that were brought into our small town, and during the summer, they would give special courses at our local high school. So they would run the bus and have the bus come out and pick up the country kids like me and take us back to the school, give us additional training. So I remember those programs. So we've been fighting at Alabama State to try to save our Upward Bound talent search by writing to our congresspersons. These programs have been severely cut. So it's important that we communicate to our Congress, because you never know what budding scientist is where. Back to Linda's story. Her life was turned around when she became a part of Upward Bound. See, she was just about to be tracked out of the system. But Joe Warren helped her turn this around. Not only did Linda earn a doctorate from MIT in chemistry, she studied in Paris, France, at the Pasteur Institute, the first black woman to do so. You may remember her from the PBS video, Discovering Women. If you don't have it, it's worth having in your school system. I think every student should see it. She's currently completing a dual master's in theology and public health at Harvard University as we speak. I hope you all will consider bringing her to Arkansas. It wasn't always easy for Linda. She was from the school of say it loud, I'm black, I'm proud. She has a bodacious attitude. That's why I say you'll never forget her. She has experienced trouble both from race and gender. So if I can just quickly bring her voice out before I get ready to end, I think you will appreciate what she has to say. One, two, okay. All right. She says, when asked about it, definitely, you have to consistently prove yourself as an intellectual being. When we walk in the door, the questions or perceptions that seem to instantly enter the mind of a person of another race are, what are you doing here? What do you want? Who are you? And so on. You're doing very well if the perception is that you are a teacher. Most often you are thought of as a maid or some other working class occupation. It really doesn't dawn on people that you can be or you are a scientist. That is a perception that is often held by all people, including our own race. You are always underestimated. You consistently have to prove yourself over and over and over again. And I asked her, can you distinguish between race and gender issues? She said they both hurt. They both feel the same. They're both painful. I can't tell the difference. At the time she was working at a black college, she says, I guess I do have some opportunity to see the differences, but either way, they both hurt. What I will say is that sexism exists in all races, but there's a distinction between racism and sexism, and they both hurt. And I appreciated what she had to say because as a student at Michigan State, I was walking down the hallway. Now, if any of you are familiar with some science buildings, how dark, and they're doing a better job, I think, now of having the science building be a little bit lighter. Well, anyway, brighter, I should say. And someone stopped me, and it happened to be one of my own race, and he indicated, you know, like, why haven't you cleaned that bathroom? And I was just stunned because I had my book packed. Then I realized that was his perception, and when I turned, he said, oh, and we just kind of let it go. But that was, I'm sure that he was thinking I was the maid. So I related when she had to, what she had to say. Now, finally, you might be wondering, how did some of the women navigate their social and family life? Most of the women in the book and the women that I have interviewed are married, or have been married. Most have children. I think that you will find some younger women often have fear or anxiety about this, and they worry about finding a mate, and that's probably true in any field. But I try to tell them, you do what you need to do to prepare yourself. That too will work out. You will find varying views, but all the women agree that whenever you get married, always choose wisely. And I think this is just good information. I want to quickly share Anna Cobble's views on marriage because she's a little bit different. She's a physicist at Howard University. She was the first black woman to receive a PhD in biophysics in 1973 from the University of Illinois. Just to put it in perspective, we've been doing physics a long time. Can anyone tell me the first black man who received the physics degree? It was in the 1800s. Not quite agriculture though, but good try. Have you heard of Edward Boucher? Edward Boucher, 1876. He received a PhD from Yale. Of course, he was relegated to teaching in high school science. But just to show you, and the first black women to get PhDs. Now, they were studying physics before, but to actually get a PhD that's noted. It's not that maybe it didn't happen, but where can we find and confirm that? So you see, it's almost 100 years from that. So she says, though, she married when she was 49 years old. See, there's hope for all of us. As far as marriage was concerned, I really wasn't looking for a husband. Marriage just came by. I think that black women have a variety of experiences with spouses and family life while trying to balance a science career. We have female students who come with children, and that has an impact on them. We have also had students who are married, and their experiences are not different from those who are single, provided they have a support system. She further says that her advice is that they must, young women scientists must have the strength of their conviction. The field must be interesting to them. And I always tell that to young people too. If it's not interesting to you, then you don't have to waste time there. Students must use their strength to be successful. Students can't allow anyone to evaluate who and what they are. I have female students say to me, and you probably heard this, my boyfriend doesn't like the fact that I'm in the sciences. I ask, are you planning to marry him? I explained to them that they must understand the limitations of this kind of person might place on them in the future. You don't want anyone to limit your options, and you shouldn't allow anyone to do that. Some young men feel intimidated that the woman is in physics, and they also feel they must compete with her. And she says, there's regret later among many of our females after they have become committed to some of these guys. They got caught up in his definition of dreams before they could realize their own. And this is a common story. And I always add to that for our young men so you don't feel left out. You need to choose wisely too. Okay? I hope that you have enjoyed hearing some of the stories of these African American women scientists, simply American stories. There are many more stories to be told. I've only barely, not even scratched the surface. My story is interwoven among these stories. I know that I stand on these women's shoulders. I stand on the shoulders of, we all stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us. So as you celebrate the 50th anniversary, I hope that you will not only thank the Little Rock Nine who paved the way, but I hope that you will thank them in another way. I hope you will pass it on. And don't think that you're too young to pass it on. You can do that in a small way. Giving your time, giving your energy, giving back. It doesn't always have to be about money. I know that I am where I'm at because of many people, including my family. But one thing that I will always say about my parents and my grandparents is that they didn't have a lot to give me materially, but they always, sometimes my mother, I felt like she gave me too much time, but they gave me time. So I think education, a solid education, is still the key. I hope you will make a small contribution by giving your time. I recently gave a talk in a training session to young girls at an Atlanta public library. When I was finished, a little 5-year-old girl came up to me and she hugged me so tight around my waist. But it wasn't just that hug. You know what she said to me? She said, Miss Diane, when I grow up, I'm going to be a scientist. That touched my heart because it meant that this long 10-year journey for me, not just about writing a book, about my life, about my survival, that meant that maybe she will consider that as a career option. But more than that, she now knows information is powerful. What we do with it is even more powerful. So I believe that that is surely one of the goals of the Clinton School of Public Service, is to give a little something back to those who have given and to those who need you the most. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for some questions. If you raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you. Over here.
Welcome. I finished college with a chemistry degree, so I joined you in the ranks of the scientists. Went ahead and got an MD. One of the major questions in this country, whether you're white or black or any ethnicity, is how do we get more engineers, more scientists, period? And what's your hypothesis about doing that?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that, because I think that one of the main things that well, I shouldn't say that we should stop doing. I think we should still continue to try to recruit the best and the brightest. But I think you should think about students who may not have all straight A's or may not always be the best and brightest. I wasn't always at my best, but I dare say that because I had a fantastic mentor along the way as an undergraduate as well as a graduate student and also at the doctoral level. I think we have to grow our own scientists, and as I said earlier, we can't wait. You have to plant the seed early. That means you have to give up some of your time. That means you may have to give up a Saturday to go talk to young people and say, you know, show them that there are options to doing that. So I do think the strategy starts very early on. I think the women in the book say that they offer the same advice. That's what I would say. We have to start early, and we have to look at a range of students, not just the straight A students. Yes, ma'am.
Right here.
My question's related to the question of the gentleman before. I spent a considerable time doing feminist science studies, and a question that I have had for a while is, for members of underrepresented groups, should we encourage youngsters to go ahead and become part of the science establishment without making them aware of the inherent sexism and racism of the structure of science?
Well, they're going to become aware. You mean as young people?
No, even as they grow older, all that's going to happen to them is that they are going to become aware of the fact that science is not a pleasant place to be because they are being discriminated against. And they're not going to know why.
Well, I think you should always educate people as much as possible. I appreciate it. I particularly at the master's level, before I was leaving to go to Michigan State, some of my professors talked with me about what to expect, what were going to be some of the possible issues. And I think I appreciated that. As a matter of fact, I made a decision not to go to coordinate. Well, I shouldn't say the name. It's too late. I went to a conference, and I had read this particular person's textbook. I had been taught out of it, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to go work with him. And I went to this conference, and they had a women's group. It wasn't about colors. And so I was telling these other graduate students, you know, I've applied, and they just went up and down describing what it was going to be like for me to work with this person. And I know that they were right, because when he wrote back saying the acceptance, he wrote a snide remark in the letter. So I was very happy that I didn't go to that school, and I actually studied with his student who was, you couldn't believe this guy came out of this man's lab, but I was glad to be informed. I think you don't lose by being informed. That's what I think.
Right here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for coming, and Linda Jorden is a personal friend of mine. But I want to say, I think that's one of the problems with education today, is that we need to see students as students and stop relating to people of color or whatever, because you have to make science exciting. And when you make science exciting, regardless of what color you is, you will get tuned to it. So I think we got to go back and stop saying, you know, we should encourage those kids, but we need to encourage all kids. And I think that's our problem, because I'm a scientist, been a scientist for 30-some years. But the fact is that when I was coming up, we was all taught that we could do, regardless of color. So I think we got to get that out of our mind, and we'll get more people interested in math and interested in science here in the state and all over. So not just, you know, let's see people as students. Let's forget that color line. I think that would be very helpful.
Yes,
Right
I agree.
Right here. Right in front of you. Right.
Oh, shoot, right.
Susan.
Oh. How many black people do you think are way up in a defense plant in New Mexico, Los Alamos, like my brother is up there with his PhD in work? And how many black people up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, do you think there are?
I don't know.
Right back here. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Candace Williams, and I'm seeking a degree in environmental biology. So my question to you was about environmental biology. And I was wondering, how do you think you can make people more aware about environmental biology, more or less, not just so recycling or other things? There are many other things as far as the environment, just not the greenhouse effect, but other things, to let them know that the environment is in trouble without beating them over the head with EPA regulations.
Yeah. Are you aware of, there's a group that's called Minorities in Agriculture, Environmental, okay. That's one way, and I worked with that group as a student when I was at Michigan State. I think just in small ways. I loved a show that Oprah did not long ago, talking about green things that we can do. So as much as we can get it in the public light, just through programs and through organizations, I think that's, I don't think you have to beat people over the head, but talk about it more as a professional. I can understand how you wrestle with that, because we never had an Earth Day program at Alabama State University until I got there. We started one about 3 or 4 years ago, and the students just loved it. And I didn't come from the point of view of let's hit you over the head, but we started with just a display type thing. We went into the student center, offered them information. We had a essay contest. I always find with students, if they find money attached to something, just to make them aware. I mean, I'm not saying it was the best way. And so this year we went from that to, actually we had a room full of students watching Al Gore's film documentary this past year, and the students were like, "Oh, this is really great, Dr. Jorden. I'm very happy you did this." And this year we're going to do a green poetry slam. Students love to do poetry. So, you know, we have to open our minds up. I'll tell you quickly one way that I teach genetics. Instead of approaching genetics from, you know, all the Punnett square, we do that, and all the problems that you have to do with genetics. The first thing that I do is I start my students off with a family tree, because family is close to their heart. And the worst student that I have will go home and talk to their family. They want to do their family tree. They want to find out who their great-great-great-great-grandparents are. I let them take it home. Then I put the questions. I ask them about phenotype. I ask them about genotype. I ask them about diseases that are prevalent in their family. Then I wrap it back around to the subject matter that's in the textbook. Then I've extended that by using do a video on race and genetics, and where they find out that they're not that different from each other, skin color. We get so hung up on that. And I find that they really respond to that. The only problem I have with the family tree, the students love it so much, they think that will get them out of the class. They will pass the class solely. And there's a whole set of things they have to do. But I said, this is just one project. You have to still pass the exam. I'm just enhancing your knowledge. And I really echo what you're saying, because when I teach the sensory, for instance, the signal transduction pathway, I take in to the classroom so they understand taste buds, the message going to the brain, all different kinds of candies and goodies, and say, okay, all right, when I start talking about the pathway, you put the candy in your mouth, and then we go from there.
We have time for a few more questions. We're going to go here, here, and right there.
I know that the National Women's History Project lists some of the schools across the nation that include women's history in the public schools. But what I'm interested in knowing is that, do you know of any programs that would include being exposed to the full range of women in science in public schools?
Not in the public school, not maybe programs that specific school systems have. I do know that there was a program, but it was called the church program, that the American Association for the Advancement of Science has a group arm, Dr. Shirley Malcolm, where they would go out, or they would have various programs. But that's one of the things that I'm hoping will come out of this, where we can actually have teachers. I've done a couple of training of the teachers and how they can incorporate the lives of other scientists in the curriculum all year long, biographies, however, so that it doesn't take away necessarily from the curriculum. A lot of them feel very bound by, No Child Left Behind and some of the school policies. I just had a young woman tell me, the reason this is all sounding strange to me, Dr. Jorden, is because I was taught to the test. So she's having a rather difficult time in my class, and I was telling her, I like to teach concepts, then get the students to relate to those concepts, as well as, I feel a student, if they have the basic skills, then they can read the details. I'm not saying I don't teach details. There are certain details they need to know, but any good, solid student that has the basic skills should be able to read the textbook. Now, a lot of students want to resist reading the textbook, so you have to work around that as well. But other than, I know there are programs that NSF does, but I don't think it's throughout the K through 12 across the country. So it's something that a few things that I'm doing in Alabama, and hoping that it will, stretch out after some time.
Right up front.
Thank you, Dr. Jorden, for coming tonight. I
Thank
appreciate
you
your
for having me.
presentation. My question to you was, I want you to elaborate more on your mentors and how they influenced your life.
Mentors were wonderful. As you all know, my parents were of a great influence, especially my mother, but I would say, not to put her on the spot, she's my older sister, so my mother always said to me, if I got Shirley straight, then you would just follow along. That's partly true. But to really answer your question, my earliest mentor started in the 8th grade. Mr. Charles Dockery was my science teacher, and I thought he taught science so well. And I had a great math teacher also, Mr. Hall. After I got to college, I didn't really meet my most effective mentor was in my junior year, and he encouraged me to go to graduate school. So it was kind of late, you know, undergraduates. I can't say I was just attached to one person, but once I got to the master's level, of course, you assign a mentor. And actually, my mentor, he was quite good, but our interests were far apart. And Dr. Robert Taylor, who came my second year, actually became my mentor. That's how I ended up going to Michigan State. I actually had a small disagreement with my advisor about, I wanted to do a project that would take my skills in biology and microbiology, and because I was in a college of ag, put those together and relate it to health. Now, we talk about environmental health all the time now, but it wasn't back in the day. We didn't do that much. So he was, Dr. Taylor, I happened to have a conversation with him, and he steered me towards Michigan State. My mentor, my PhD mentor, since I was, as Julie mentioned, one of the first blacks to go, particularly in the College of Ag. One of the things that he did was to place me with a postdoctoral person. You know, that's a person who has a PhD, but they are still in training. That worked really well for me. He was my advisor, PhD advisor, was quite well known, so he didn't have a lot of time. So that was one way he solved that. But he's been wonderful, because I think also he may have been a little uncomfortable, and I will say, I can deal with someone who's a little uncomfortable as long as you are helping me to move towards my goals. And that's what I try to tell young people. Don't get caught up in that. Oh, it's time for me to shut up.
Ladies, no, it's not time for you to shut up. You're absolutely wonderful. Dr. Diane Jorden. Thank you. Now we're going to give her just a minute to get off this stage and go back where she is going to be prepared to sign these books. And I will tell you, because we won't fall off this thing, I will tell you that that I have been thumbing through this book. And Annie, you're going to love it. Because on page 27 is a timeline. And it is something you and I have been talking about for 20 years. And Dr. Jorden has done this, and it is fascinating, and we ought to make sure our friends at the school district have this. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. We have a reception. Help yourself. Please go back and buy the book and visit with her, and we will see you tomorrow night as we continue our series of programs. Thanks.